All right, today we're going to take what is probably one of the most famous lines in all of Scripture, and the earth was formless and void, and we are going to crack it wide open. Because what the deepest mystical sources tell us is that this isn't just poetry. It's not a description of, nothingness. It's actually a highly technical blueprint, almost like an engine schematic for creation itself. Okay, let's dive right in.
So our journey really kicks off here with this incredibly cryptic passage from the Book of Concealment, and it sets a chilling but really profound stage. Our reality, the one you and I are in right now, it isn't the first version. It's actually built on the wreckage, on the shattered fragments of previous, totally unstable cosmic systems. These primordial kings, there were worlds that just couldn't hold it together. They died, and in their death, they left behind the raw material for everything that was about to come.
Okay, so here's the game plan for this deep dive. First, we'll look at the verse itself and the huge mystery hidden right there in its grammar. Then, we're going to explore the primordial crash that set the stage for our entire universe. After that, we are going to decode the original Hebrew technical terms Tohu and Bohu, and trust me, they are not synonyms. Then we'll get into the weeds with the alchemy of creation, the real mechanics of how you sift order out of chaos. We'll even translate this ancient code into some modern analogies, taking it from code to cosmos. And finally, we'll see why this ancient blueprint is still so profoundly relevant for us today. So we all know this verse from Genesis 1:2, and the earth was Tohu VaBohu. And it's almost always translated as formless and void, or without form and empty. But what if that translation misses the entire point? What if, instead of describing an absence of anything, it's actually describing a hyperactive, turbulent, and absolutely essential phase of creation? A kind of cosmic birthing process. Okay, let's zoom in on just one word here, haita, which means was. The Zohar makes a huge point about this. The verse doesn't say, and the earth came into being. It says it was Tohu and Bohu. Now this implies a pre-existing state. The earth didn't just pop out of nothingness into chaos. It transformed into chaos from a state it was already in. This is huge. This is our first real clue that we're actually dealing with the aftermath of some prior event. So that begs the question, right? If the earth already was, then what was it before all this chaos? Why did it become this chaotic maelstrom? To answer that, we have to go back. Back before the beginning to the Kabbalistic doctrine of the worlds that existed before our own. These were the prototypes, the first attempts at creation. The fatal flaw really, in these primordial worlds which are known as the Seven Kings of Edom, was their complete lack of balance. They were built on one single unmitigated principle, the force of din. And din translates to pure judgment, limitation, severity. They had absolutely no measure of its opposite force, rachamim, or mercy. I mean, think about it. It's like trying to run a supercar engine with no coolant, or a nuclear reactor without its control rods. It's just not going to work. That's the idea here. These worlds were just pure, unadulterated power. The mystical texts describe them as vessels that were just too brittle, too rigid to contain the infinite, expansive light of creation that was being poured into them. They couldn't handle the intensity. And because they had zero flexibility, zero balance from mercy, these worlds couldn't sustain themselves. They failed, catastrophically. They just shattered. This cosmic event is known as Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. And it is this cataclysm, this primordial crash, that produces the chaotic raw material that the verse calls Tohu VaBohu. And this is absolutely key. The primordial kings weren't just some failed beta test. Their shattering was a necessary deconstruction. The fragments that resulted, the shards or kelipot, they actually become the building blocks for our world. So chaos, you see, isn't an absence of order, it's the state of all the shattered pieces of a previous order, just waiting to be reassembled into something totally new and way more resilient. All right, now let's get into the nitty-gritty, the main event. We've established that Tohu VaBohu is the raw material from this big cosmic crash. But these aren't just two different words for a mess. No way. They are precise, technical terms that describe two very distinct phases in the process of creation. Think of it like two different stages on a cosmic assembly line. Let's break this down. So on the left, you've got Tohu. The root of the word itself actually means to be bewildered. And that's perfect. This is the initial state of pure, raw, undifferentiated potential. The Zohar even calls it the pesalat, the refuse or filth, like the slag you get when you smelt ore. In our tech analogy, this is the raw, unrefined data stream, just a blast of pure, chaotic information with zero structure.
Now look at the right. We have Bohu. The Sefer HaBahir does this brilliant thing. It breaks the word down into two. Bohu. Substance is in it. You see? This is the very next stage. Out of that bewildering chaos of Tohu, the first hint of form starts to emerge. It's substance, yeah, but it's not stable yet. It is the very first act of birur, or clarification, that's been sifted out of the raw material. In our tech analogy, this is the partially structured output. The system has started to process the raw data, and the first recognizable but still shaky patterns are coming through.
So this really lays out the whole process from start to finish. Let's stick with that cosmic computer analogy. Step 1, you have the raw data input, that's Tohu. Then, step 2, the system starts its initial processing, creating those partially structured outputs, that's Bohu. Step 3 is the real workhorse, Bihor, the sifting and refinement, where the system is actively sorting the useful, stable data from all that chaotic junk. And this whole process leads, ultimately, to step 4, Tikkun, or rectification, where a stable, balanced, fully functional architecture finally emerges. And that, my friends, is the creation of a cosmos out of chaos.
Okay, we've seen the 30,000-foot view. Now let's get our hands dirty with the actual mechanics. How exactly does a stable universe get sifted out of this primordial soup? The texts describe it with a language that feels deeply alchemical, a process of separation, purification, and recombination.
And you gotta understand, this is a total paradigm shift. Creation from absolute nothing, that's not the model we're using here. The model is Bikur, sifting, and Pezelet, refuse. Order emerges by separating and organizing what is already there in the chaotic aftermath of that primordial crash. It's all about finding the signal in the noise.
I mean, listen to this imagery from the Zohar. It's just incredible. It describes a process, snow within water. So that represents a state of potential, a mixture of forces. Then, out of this mixture, filth emerged, this raw, impure substance, and this nest of refuse, that is Tohu. But then the process continues. Bohu is the refinement, the pure substance that is clarified from that refuse. It's literally an act of purification.
So this table here, it really breaks down the core dynamics of how this all works. The initial chaos contains the potential for 4 foundational elements. First, you have fire, esh, which connects back to the force of judgment. In our tech analogy, it's the thermal noise of a system that's just running way too hot. Its opposite is water, or snow, which corresponds to mercy. That's the cooling state that brings everything back into balance. Mediating between those two is spirit, or air, a force of synthesis. And finally, you have the refuse itself, sediment, or earth, which represents the discarded data, the junk files in our tech model.
So it all starts with this fundamental duality. The two primary forces that were so dangerously unbalanced in those first worlds, judgment and mercy, fire and water.
Then, this initial binary opposition, which is mediated by spirit and grounded in the refuse of earth, it expands into the 4 foundational elements, and these become the literal building blocks for all of reality.
And finally, through this continued process of sifting and refinement, these forces get organized into the 10 stable Sephirot, the perfected, balanced architecture of the cosmos, the tree of life. You can see this beautiful progression. It goes from 2 to 4 to the complete stable system of 10. The whole shebang.
Okay, I know that was a lot of dense, heavy mechanics, but the power of this system is that it's not just some abstract theory. It's a map of reality that you can actually understand through different lenses. So let's try to translate this ancient code into a couple of powerful modern analogies. So, how do we get our heads around this cosmic machine? How do we make it feel, real? How do we really grasp this idea of sifting order out of the chaotic fragments of a world that existed before ours? Well, the text gave us the blueprint, so we can build a couple of models to understand it. Okay, so for all the engineers and tech people out there, think of it like this. The shattering of the vessels, that's a high-energy, turbulent input into a new system. Tohu is a state of maximum entropy. The process of Barur and the emergence of Bohu is basically an act of entropy management. The formation of the 4 elements, that's a phase transition, just like steam condensing into water and then freezing into ice. And the final tikkun, the balanced sephirot, that's the achievement of a stable, self-regulating, complex system from an initial state of pure energy and chaos. It maps perfectly onto principles of thermodynamics and information theory.
All right, now let's try a completely different approach. Think of it like a video game. A developer is building a new world. The first version, the alpha build, it's full of bugs. The physics are all wrong, the assets are clashing. That's the primordial crash. So the developer takes all those broken assets, the kelopot, and just dumps them into a new sandbox level. That level is Tohu VaBohu. It's a total mess of fire that burns everything, water that floods everything, wind that blows it all away. The player's job, which is the act of creation, is to learn the properties of these chaotic elements, to separate them, build containers for them, and then combine them in just the right way to create a stable, beautiful, and functioning world.
And that brings us to the final leg of our journey, and honestly, maybe the most important part. We've seen the what and the how, but now we really need to understand the why. Why did creation have to start with this violent crash and this bewildering, overwhelming chaos?
The big takeaway here is that the crash wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bug. The chaos of Tohu VaBohu was a necessary feature. Those first worlds, the ones built on pure, unmitigated judgment, they were too simple. They were too one-dimensional. By shattering them, a far greater potential was unlocked. The fragments, the kelopot, they provided the raw material for a much more complex, nuanced, and dynamic reality, a reality that could contain both judgment and mercy, limitation and expansion, shadow and light.
And this, right here, is where this massive cosmic blueprint becomes a super personal, intimate map for our own lives. Those moments of Tohu VaBohu in your own experience, the confusion, the breakdowns, the shattering of your old worlds, they aren't just things to be survived. They are the source of the raw material for your own growth. Balance isn't some static state you achieve once and you're done. It's the constant, dynamic process of sifting through your experiences, integrating your own internal fire and water. Every single time you sit down to organize your thoughts, or mend a relationship, or bring order to a project, you are reenacting that primordial act of creation. And the pesolates, the refuse, the really difficult and challenging parts of your life, they are not a sign of failure. They are an inseparable part of the refinement process that leads to a stronger, more integrated you.
So, we'll leave you with this final thought. The mystics teach us that our universe is a rectified system, a beautiful and stable cosmos built from the wreckage of what came before. So the question becomes personal. What new, more balanced, and more resilient world are you building from the fragments of your own experience? Thank you for joining us for this complete journey through the Pardes. We hope these ancient truths help you and your family improve your own dimensions this week. If you enjoyed this full chapter deep dive, please like, subscribe, and share which part of the journey touched your soul in the comments. We'll see you in the next chapter.